Matthew 14:22 through 23. Jesus walks on water. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up onto the mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from the land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink. Cried out, "Lord, save me!" Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God."
Today's service is being recorded on Shrove Tuesday, also known as Fat Tuesday or Mardi Gras, as most people know it as. It's the day most folks gorge themselves on the food that they will give up for the next 40 days for the season of Lent. When you view this message or this reflection, it will already be Ash Wednesday, which is a highly significant day in the Christian church that marks the beginning of the season of Lent. Those who acknowledge Ash Wednesday typically participate in services where they confess their sins before God and receive forgiveness for their sins. In a so-called normal year, you would likely see folks walking around with a smudge of ashes in the shape of a cross on their foreheads. You might find that strange if you've never participated in an Ash Wednesday service. Ash Wednesday services also remind participants of their shared humanity. When people receive their ashes, the person or the priest, the minister administering those ashes, typically says, "Remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return." Again, a simple reminder that during Lent, we should remember that we're moving from death into new life, just as Christ did upon the cross at his death and into life in his resurrection. Lent is a time of self-examination and reflection. It's a time to look at our own lives and to ask hard and difficult questions like, what is separating me from God? And what are the things that are holding me back from being able to live a free and joyful and resurrected life as a Christian? During Lent, some Christians choose to fast, or, in other words, to give up things that are distractions from being closer to God. It's also been tradition for Christians to add a spiritual discipline to their daily lives, such as reading a daily devotional in order to draw nearer to God. I kind of like the idea of both, giving something up and adding a spiritual discipline. A second ago I posed the question, what is separating me from God? As a question that Christians typically seek to answer during the season of Lent. During the last year, I think many who will see this message will agree that fear has been an overwhelming presence in my life, and like I said, in many of your lives as well. The COVID-19 pandemic has been the leading factor driving that fear this year for myself. I've been afraid that I would contract COVID-19 or that my family would contract COVID-19 and then one of them might die from the virus. I've been afraid for family and friends who have lost their jobs because of the pandemic. I've been afraid that they might not be able to find something to keep them economically stable and be able to keep their homes, be able to feed and provide for their families. I've been afraid that the vaccine won't get to the people who need it the most in time. I've been afraid that my church won't make it through the pandemic, as so many other churches have had to close their doors because they just did not have the money to pay their mortgage. Lent has always represented a solemn period of penance, reflection, and prayer, but this year, that reflection is different for so many of us. Though vaccinations are on the rise, the COVID-19 virus, has killed nearly 500,000 people in the United States alone, and it has forced so many more into isolation, away from those that they love and care about the most. For many Christians, Lent in 2021 has also taken on a new significance beyond the requirements of social distancing. Many Christians are seeking a way to let go of the fear they felt this year and move toward hope and move toward love out of fear. When we are overwhelmed by fear, we don't feel close to God because it separates us from God. It separates us from one another, and it holds us back from living a life that's filled with joy and hope and love. What if we use this Lent season to practice facing our fears rather than ignoring or running from them? While researching what I wanted to speak on today, I came across the following poem titled Fear by Kyron Carson. It's an older poem, so don't be concerned if you're unsure what some of the references mean. But I just want you to take a moment and recognize that fear is a common human response and a common human occurrence. Fear is timeless and will always affect each of us differently. So now hear these words from Kyron Carson. Fear. I fear the vast dimensions of eternity. I fear the gap between the platform and the train. I fear the onset of a murderous campaign. I fear the palpitations caused by too much tea. I fear the drawn pistol of a referee. I fear the books will not survive the acid rain. I fear the ruler and the blackboard and the cane. I fear the Jabberwock, whatever it may be. I fear the bad decisions of a referee. I fear the only recourse is to plead insane. I fear the implications of a lawyer's fee. I fear the gremlins that have colonized my brain. I fear to read the small point of the guarantee. And what else do I fear? Let me begin again. You know, like the poet, we fear so many different things. For instance, we fear the truth. Sometimes the truth seems a little too scary, and we're afraid that if we hear the truth, we won't be able to handle it. Our health is one area that can be negatively impacted by fear. We have all likely known someone, or maybe you've experienced this yourself, who had reason to believe that something was wrong with their health, but decided that we might not do anything about it. We decided not to go to the doctor because we can't handle the truth sometimes, or we are afraid of what the truth might be. Sometimes when we are afraid to know the truth, we do nothing. And this can lead to some very negative consequences or very negative conditions when our health is concerned. Another example of something we're afraid of is something happening within our relationships, whether romantic or otherwise. There are times when folks will comment after a breakup or a divorce, you know, looking back now, I see the signs, and I knew they were there, but I just didn't want to confront them. I didn't want to ask the hard questions because I was afraid to hear the answers. And because of that fear, to look hard at our own relationships, those relationships can sometimes fall apart. Reality really doesn't change when we deny it. But when we confront reality, we can change how we choose to react to it. When you and I remember that we're not alone, we realize that we have strength that comes from beyond ourselves, a strength that allows us to face the difficult truth or truths, even when it's hard. You know, chronic fear can really make life difficult. Physicians around the world agree that long-term fear can cause physical health issues. It can impair your brain's ability to form long-term memories. Fear can interrupt processes that regulate emotion. And finally, fear can cause fatigue, depression, and even PTSD. Fear is not something to mess around with. If you can face your fears and at least acknowledge that they're there, and then put your faith and trust in God, those fears can be left in the background. God is big enough to take those fears head on. Let me repeat that for some of those who need to hear it. God is big enough to take those fears head on. Release those fears. When the pandemic began a year ago, I was introduced to a quote by St. Julian of Norwich, who is known quite famously for saying something like this. It's not quite known 100% that she said these words in this exact order, but she has been quoted by saying, "All shall be well, all shall be well, all manner of things shall be well." You know, I have used these words from St. Julian of Norwich as a mantra for the last year whenever I become extremely stressed out or extremely afraid or fearful. I know it might not seem like much to some, but these words help me recenter myself, and those words remind me that I'm not alone in my fear. I'm not alone in my fear. I'm not alone because God is with me. I'm not alone because others also face the same fears that I face. And know this, you are not alone in your fears. God is with you. There are family and friends, resources out there in the world that want you to know that you are not alone in facing your fears. So just remember that. If these words help you, like they have helped me, I want you to use them as a mantra for yourself as well. All shall be well. All shall be well. All manner of things shall be well.
Whenever I feel afraid, I hold my head erect and whistle a happy tune so no one will suspect I'm afraid. While shivering in my shoes, I strike a careless pose and whistle a happy tune so no one ever knows I'm afraid. The results of this deception is very strange to tell, for when I fool the people I fear, I fool myself as well. I whistle a happy tune, and every single time the happiness in the tune convinces me that I'm not afraid. Make believe you're brave, and the trick will take you far. You may be as brave as you make believe you are. You may be as brave as you make believe you are.
Fear follows us. Fear stalks us. Fear controls us. Fear is all we think. Fear sleeps with us. Fear eats with us. Fear surrounds us. Fear is everywhere. Fear can be stopped. Fear can go away. Fear is only an emotion. Fear will be stopped. Stopped by love.